All right, we are recording. Hey, it is Miss Kellett and Miss Unschreiner, and we're going to talk to you
Hello.
today about narrative writing and sensory language. So before we start, just to kind of help you, sometimes these videos, these note-taking videos might be a little bit long, right? And we want to make sure that your brain is processing everything. So it's really important that you take a pause or a break and let your brain process the material. So you might want to hit pause on the video a couple of times so that you're able to like give your brain a second to think about what you've been writing down.
Okay, so what you are going to do right now is in your notebook, you should have a full blank page of notes available to you. And you're going to take this focus notes template that we're going to use, and you're going to copy it down onto that sheet of notebook paper. So the reason that we use a template like this is so we have space for all the important components of your notes. You put your date and your topic at the top, and you can see that the topic is narrative writing, sensory language, and figurative language, because that's what we're going to be talking about. Underneath that is your essential question, which by the end of your note taking, you should be able to answer in your summary at the bottom. So our two questions for today are, how do authors write effective and strong narratives? And what are sensory and figurative language, and how do they help strengthen a narrative? In the middle, you'll see that you have the biggest space for taking your notes. And while you're taking your notes, just remember that you don't have to write down every single word on every single slide, because that's going to be crazy and take you forever. But if you read a sentence and you feel like there's a phrase from that sentence that's going to capture the whole idea and it's going to help you remember it, you should just write that down. So make sure you're getting all the ideas, but you don't have to get all the words. And then on the left-hand side, there's some space for you to write questions about your notes, which is really important. And just remember that questions aren't necessarily things you don't understand. Sometimes they're things that cause you to think deeper. So maybe like, how would I use this in storytelling or something like that, instead of just, I don't get it.
Awesome. And that's a great place to write down your ideas when you take a pause from the video. If you hit pause and you have a question or you want to think a little more deeply about it, it's a great place to put it. Okay, so we're going to talk about sensory language. So sensory language is language that uses the 5 senses: sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing or sound, to help the reader imagine the setting, events, or the characters. So you're going to see these 5 different sentences, 5 different examples, all talking about a carnival. And you're going to notice that there's a lot of the senses, right? So you're going to be able to imagine the sights, the smells, the tastes, and all of that. So take a second, pause, and look through some of these sentences, and you might copy down some phrases that really stand out to you as examples of the 5 senses.
Okay, so when we're thinking about how does sensory language help to strengthen a narrative, right here, there are 2 examples. The top example uses really great sensory language, which is showing the experiences that the person is having through the sight, smell, taste, touch, and sound. Whereas the bottom example is more about telling, which means that this person is just kind of describing things in language that's a little bit vague. So they say things like, it was really fun, it was scary, it was loud, I was nervous, which is a lot that doesn't actually really help us feel and sense what's going on, whereas the top example does. So what you could take a minute to do right now is go ahead and again pause, read over the 2 examples in their entirety, and then in your notes, what you should write down is not necessarily the examples, although you could take a couple little excerpts from each one, but write down some ideas about how the sensory language in the first example helps to make the story stronger. And that's something that we're probably going to talk about in class as well, so you can get down your ideas before we share out together. So go ahead and take a minute, pause, and read those examples and think about what about the first one makes it stronger than the second one.
Okay, so you've kind of done a little bit of work with sensory language, and now we're going to talk about figurative language. So figurative language is language that has a meaning that's deeper than the basic meaning that's being said in that sentence. So it expresses an idea in an interesting way by using language that usually describes something else. It requires the reader to interpret, and figurative language is not meant to be taken literally. So for example, if I said, it's 1,000 degrees outside today, I do not literally mean that it is 1,000 degrees, right? I mean like it's really hot. So that's an example
Feels
of
like
how
1,000 degrees.
exactly. So figurative language is something that like you mean something different than what you literally say. So it's different from the use of more literal language, which does not require additional interpretation or hold as much depth. So another example would be when she entered the room, it was like a ray of sunshine coming straight from the heavens, right? So she's not literally a ray of sunshine, but we can tell that this person is really happy to see whoever this girl is, right? Because we have the word sunshine, which is usually positive, and we have the word heavens, which is usually positive.
Okay, so we're going to go over some types of figurative language. The two types that you probably already know, because they're the most common types of figurative language, are similes and metaphors, which are almost the same. They're both figurative comparisons of two unlike things, but similes use like or as, and metaphors don't. They would use something like is, was, or were, or another form of to be. So in these examples, I'll just use one. Her eyes were like hot coals piercing his deepest thoughts. Or as a metaphor, her eyes were hot coals piercing his deepest thoughts. Similarly to that last example, right? It's not just saying she has an intense look on her face, which could mean a million different things, and we can't totally understand the feeling that's being conveyed. But here it's like you can tell that he feels like she's looking deep into his soul and she can see what he's thinking, and you can tell it's this like burning kind of intense sensation that he's seeing from her. And we get a lot more with that metaphor or simile and the comparison and what it implies that we have to kind of listen to and figure out, versus just someone saying like she was looking at him, right? So what you can do on this slide is there's a picture in the upper right hand corner of this woman, and we don't really know what's going on with her. But if you go ahead and pause your slide, you can practice writing a simile or a metaphor to describe her that's maybe going to give us like an interesting and unique perspective on what's going on in that picture.
Okay, here are a couple of other examples of figurative language. So a hyperbole is what I was using earlier when I said it's 1,000 degrees. It's extremely exaggerated statements that are used to emphasize or impress. I was definitely emphasizing how hot it is today. And there are some other examples there. John ate 15,000 burgers, a ton of fries, and a gallon of soda. Physically impossible in one sitting, I think, right? So it's an exaggeration. Okay, and then the other one is personification, when an author gives human attributes to inanimate objects. Okay, so the wind whistled through the trees. So when we think about whistling, we think about a human. I actually can't whistle. Can you whistle, Miss Hunter?
Barely, not great at it.
But humans are supposed to be able to whistle, right? And the wind, it's not a human, so it can't like use its mouth to whistle, right? So it's giving a human quality to a non-human. Okay.
Personification is my favorite type of figurative language.
I think you can, yeah, do a lot with making an object into like a person with like a particular personality, right? Like I think in our example with the sunrise welcoming you to work, right? It warmly greets you, right? Like that just, I don't know, it's nice. It gives personality to objects. Okay. While reading the literary example on the next slide, consider why might an author use figurative language to convey emotions or describe events?
That is something Miss Kella and I could talk about when we go over the example, because that's a good question. Okay, so this example is from the poem Caged Bird by Maya Angelou. And I'm going to read you the example, and you can tell in the example that she's using kind of this extended metaphor of a bird to potentially symbolize something else or make us think of something else, but it conveys some pretty strong emotions. So I'm going to read the poem out loud, and then Miss Kellett and I are going to have a little conversation about it. But while you're listening, and if you want to pause and take a couple notes down, some things to think about are, what are the types of figurative language being used? What might the author be describing, and why would she use figurative language to describe it instead of something else? And then maybe just think about some important words that stick out to you or details that stick out to you that really like capture the overall idea. Okay. So it says, but a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. So what sticks out to you, Miss Kellett, about that figurative language in the poem?
Yeah, so I'm wondering what the caged bird stands for, if it's actually a bird that she's describing or if it's something more than that. And I don't think that the bird is literally standing on a grave of dreams. I think that that is figurative as well.
So when it says a grave of dreams, because obviously dreams aren't dead or alive for real, what does it kind of convey? Do you think that it says a grave of dreams? What does that personification make you think of?
Yeah, so it makes me think that the bird's dreams are no longer alive because it's a grave, which means that it's been buried dead.
Mm-hmm. I think also when I'm thinking about the figurative language, we might not necessarily know exactly what the bird is supposed to represent, but when I think of a bird, I think of something that is free and like flies around and it can go anywhere and it can do anything because it has wings, and we kind of associate birds with like freedom and kind of happiness. So I think that when it says his wings are clipped and his feet are tied, that kind of feels like you're taking something that's really free and beautiful and it's being prevented somehow from being free, which kind of goes along with the cage as well.
Yeah, and I think that she's using figurative language to describe this kind of because of what you already said, right? That like a bird is something that's supposed to be really free, and we can actually imagine a bird, and it's actually like really sad to think about a bird whose wings are clipped and whose feet can't even move. And so it really helps us to like imagine what it might be like to lose whatever freedom or dreams she's talking about here.
Definitely. So something you guys could think about as you continue to take your notes is some of the other words we didn't mention. So what's the significance of the singing maybe, or the nightmare scream? And it says his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. Think about like a cage and what a cage might signify. So there's some other words and details in there that you could write about and reflect on. And then we'll talk about it in class together and kind of see what everyone was thinking as well.
Okay, what else creates a strong narrative? So we're going to be talking about narrative a lot. And something that strong creative writers do is they think carefully about what items, so like clothes, toys, cars and instruments, what events like moments, car crashes, packing boxes, or details like sensory language, sound, image, settings, which of those things they want to describe. And then they use specific sensory details and figurative language that match the attitude they have toward items or events. So for example, if we go back to the carnival examples at the very beginning with the sensory language, it's pretty clear that the person was enjoying the carnival, right? And so we can tell that they chose details that were going to have that effect and show that attitude of like appreciation and excitement toward the carnival. Imagine if you went to the carnival and you were not enjoying it, how your description would be totally different, right? So strong writers think very carefully about how they want to show their attitude toward a particular event or a particular object.
Can I give an example that just popped into my brain while you were
Yes,
talking? Have you seen
definitely.
the movie Stranger Than Fiction?
I have not.
Okay, it's really good. It has Will Ferrell in it. But so in the movie, he is an IRS agent, which means he like does people's taxes basically. And he is this like really boring guy who does the exact same thing every single day. And they want you to understand that at the very beginning of the movie is like he's super routine, he never does anything different, everything's the same. So the intro to the movie is him doing every single thing he normally does in his morning, and it's really obvious he always does it at the same time. So like it shows him getting up and he like slides his feet into his shoes, and then it shows him brushing his teeth and he like does it for the exact right amount of time. And then it shows him walking to work and he like steps out of the way of this bus right when it drives by and like sprays water. And so it's really obvious that he knows that that's what's going to happen. So right at the beginning, it's conveying to us through the details that like this person is really monotonous and they do the same thing every day.
It's an interesting role for Will Ferrell to be playing.
Yeah, it was really good.
Awesome. So based on these sensory details below from my name, which is a narrative we're going to be reading, how does the narrator feel about her name? So here's what she writes. It is like the number 9, a muddy color. They say my name funny, as if the syllables were made out of tin and hurt the roof of your mouth. Okay, so we've got 2 similes here. So you want to kind of think about what are these similes telling us about her attitude toward her name? Do we want to talk about it, Missy, or just let people write it down?
Maybe just let people come up with an idea and then you could pause. And I know it says with a partner. I think it's because we've done it with a partner before, but you could maybe answer that question. So what do you think the narrator thinks about her name? And then also another thing that you could do is describe a rainy day, and you can kind of think about how you can make your attitude really positive towards that day, or you can make it really negative based on what you write. And then we can talk about both of those after people have some ideas.
Perfect. So go ahead and pause. And we're done.
So something that you can do now that you are finished is go ahead back to your notes that you've taken on the right hand side, and you can write some questions that you still have. So for example, if you wrote down an example about the rainy day, you could think about like, how could I use language to make this more positive or more negative? That might be a question that you have. Highlight some key ideas. So a few things from that where you're like, I feel like this is really important. And then at the bottom of your paper where it says summary, summarize what you wrote in just a few sentences out of your own brain. Like, here's what I think I learned, and try and make sure you're answering the original essential questions in your summary.
Yeah. And the reason we're taking notes is so that you can go back and look at them later, right? So if you take the time to highlight and summarize right now, when you go back to your notes later, when you need them, it's going to be easier for you to find the most important information.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Awesome. We are done.
Thank
you for your awesome notes. We will talk about them in class when we see you.
See you later.